Well, welcome to the Faith of the Fathers podcast. I'm your host, Carl Gessler, reigniting the calling of men in the world today because men are the gatekeepers of society. We are the ones who protect the family, we're the ones who provide stability, and many of us have abdicated from our roles. Many of us also feel hopeless, that we're already disqualified and that we don't have the tools to be what God created us to be. That is not true. You are able, you are capable. God is reconciling the world to himself, beginning with you, and then as he reconciles you to himself, he is reconciling the world to himself through you. That's what the Apostle Paul says in his second letter to the Corinthians. He says, we are ambassadors of Christ, as though God were making an appeal through us. We beg you, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. Today we're going to be hearing a testimony from our brother Andy Berry, who's across the pond in England. He's going to be sharing his story of healing, of forgiveness, he now has a family with children that are growing into adulthood, loving Jesus. He has a successful, happy marriage, happy family, even though neither he nor his wife came from whole families. Both of them come from broken families. It is possible to break the cycle. It's always possible to break the cycle. We need to believe, as the scriptures say, that God is able to do abundantly beyond all we've asked or imagined. We are not doomed to live in failure. And so today, I trust that you're going to be encouraged through Andy Berry's testimony. So let's get right to it. Well, I have a special guest with me today for the podcast. Across the pond, we've got Andy. Andy's going to be sharing his testimony today, and Andy Berry. And the last time, Andy, we had someone with a British accent on the podcast was a few years ago, and his name was N.T. Wright. So you're in good company today.
There you go.
Yeah, so looking forward to hearing your story. I discovered Andy through the Dingdash website, which is a social media platform created by our friends at Back to Jerusalem, which is intended to be a free speech platform, particularly aimed at people doing a ministry in closed countries. So it's been a cool place to, with all the censorship that's been going on in the supposedly free world, Dingdash was a nice place to go, and also to discover other people of faith, other people that share our conviction to follow Jesus. And so that's how I discovered Andy. Andy and his wife and children they do a YouTube channel. Maybe you want to share a little bit about that with us. But you've had a journey, Andy, to get where you are today as a father of three and a husband. Tell us who Andy is today, and then I'd love to hear for you to share where you've come from, because I think other people need to hear what's possible, no matter what background you come from.
Yeah, sure. Andy, I'm married now for 25 years. Basic credentials, I suppose. Yeah, 25 years. You've got three children, one of whom turns 18 tomorrow, which is a bit awesome. I want to say it's scary because that's what people say, but he's great. He's a great godly man. So that's a
awesome.
Success story.
Yeah.
We'll circle back to that one. But yeah, he turns 18 tomorrow, and we've got a 16 and we've got an 11-year-old. And we've got a daughter who would have been our third child, who we lost many years ago now. So we always think about her as well. But yeah, so we've got three boys, and they're great. They're really good lads, and part of a legacy that we are trying to create. Jumping ahead in the story, perhaps, but that's kind of who we are. We're trying to create a strong base for our boys who all know Christ, that they can then go and be godly men themselves and be godly husbands and godly fathers. That's our desire. That's what we wanted to do when we first got married in the late 90s. And it's still our desire. We've made many sacrifices along the way. When we first got married, we always decided that one of us would stay at home. Whatever happened, we want one of us at home with the kids. That was our plan before we had children. Stephen didn't come along it was like 8 years before we actually had our first child, but we still stuck to that. And we've always tried to have one of us at home, and it's not permanent. We've had times when I've gone back to work and moments where we're both working, but really that doesn't last long. We come back to, we want one of us at home. And there's a huge cost to that. You can be better off with two incomes. But we also know the costs of working two incomes. As much as you're getting money, it costs an awful lot of money to be able to earn the extra money. And when we have done that, we've often thought, you know what, it's not really worth the little bit extra we may get, because you're running a second car and you've got extra stresses. Who's going to do the dinner? We've forgotten to buy the food because we're both working. So as much as a double income can be great financially, there's cost to that as well. So there's a cost of being one of us at home, and there's a cost of both of us being at work. So, everybody's got to work out what they need to do. But that was our goal, our desire, our dream when we got married in 96. And we always wanted to do that. And we've always basically managed that. It's tight, it's hard. We've had some great journeys along the way, some great stories we can discuss. But we've always managed basically one of us at home, which I think has been important. Mostly me. I've been a stay-at-home dad for on and off since Stephen was born. I've gone back to work as a lorry driver when Joe's been having a baby and with a pregnancy, and then maternity leave. Quite often I'll go back and get a year or two's work or what have you. But generally speaking, there's one of us, and it's generally me. And that's been a challenge in the UK as a stay-at-home dad, going to toddler groups with lots of mums who look at you weirdly, like, what are you doing in this room? You're the wrong gender. So that's been fun. But we always decided one of us was going to stay at home. Joe could earn what I earned in almost half the hours. So it was a no-brainer. Why would we want to do that? Yes, I could go to work and do 70 hours a week, but Joe can do that in 37. So it was a kind of a financial thing at this time, and we kind of stuck with it. So, and with 3 boys, I think it's been great. They've had a dad at home, not just around, but actually at home. I mean, it's funny. We went. Joe would finish on a Friday. We'd go out to the shops or whatever for a coffee on a Saturday, and I wouldn't push the pram because I've done it all week. And you get the judgmental looks and the odd comment of typical bloke, can't be bothered. And we never said anything, but we smiled because actually it was my day off. And that's fine. People can judge, and they will. And it makes us smile. And we just go back to our cup of coffee and our tea, and that's fine.
I'm actually glad to hear that in Great Britain that there still is that sense of like there are proper or traditional roles, because that's been so broken down that it was unfortunate for you in your circumstance, but I'm glad to hear that people still have that instinct intact.
There is.
Yeah.
We may be politically correct, but not really.
Right.
I think when you get to it and you get past the certain spheres and spheres in life and stuff, I think people generally think the mum should be at home and look after the kids. So it's been fun breaking some stereotypes. I mean, another one is we had a business. We prayed to God as a family, Joe and I. We wanted to follow God, and we prayed for God to teach us faith. And it's one of those prayers. I love the Garth Brooks song, "Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers." This was an answered prayer. And it's the sort of prayer I imagine God would love to answer. And that started us off on a journey early, 2007 or something, where we sold our house. But as a result of that, we went into a business selling eco-friendly stuff, and we sold some breastfeeding stuff. And I ended up, through various God incidents, I was delivering breastfeeding talks to brand new mums every 3 weeks for several years with the midwives. And I loved it because I was talking about cup feeding, which is our little thing that we did, because Joe heard about it. So we found some little special cups for babies. So when she went back to work, so we didn't use a bottle. And I'd go and do this talk every 3 weeks. It was great. I loved it. Just being able to break the stereotype. So I was known as the breastfeeding man. That was what I became jokingly known as, because I delivered talks on breastfeeding, specifically cup feeding. But it's great. I met a lady 5-6 years later, and she had a husband with her and several children. I met, I don't know, it must have been 30 or 40 mums every 3 weeks over several years. So I'm rubbish with faces. And she said to her husband, "That's the breastfeeding man." So that was me. So
wow.
It was great.
I wasn't
it was good
prepared
fun
for this.
There you go. You see? So we've had some good fun. I was on radio at one point, and I became known as the Velcro man because I had some nappies, cloth nappies with Velcro. And the guy was the BBC radio, and he said, "It's the Velcro man." So I was on there for ages because we were having a right laugh. Because I'd just come from driving trucks overnight, and I came in and was talking about cloth nappies. So it made for a really fun interview. It was supposed to be 5 minutes. It was nearly an hour.
Right.
Because he didn't want to let me out of the studio. It was just great fun. Well, his ex-trucker.
Before my listeners think that I'm here to push a gender roles agenda,
Absolutely.
uh, I know because I know I've read your story. You have a particular passion for being a particular kind of dad, and I
Yeah.
think a compassionate, engaged a dad who cares about the emotional well-being of his kids. So for people who are listening, they may be thinking like, what's up with this guy? Is he just some kind of liberal Christian who's just trying to push the envelope? I just want to say that I don't think that's who Andy is. There's a reason that you have this passion.
Yes.
Tell us about your childhood. Tell us how you got to where you are now, because I know it has not been an easy journey for you.
No. So my family is quite complicated. I know people say that, but mine really is. So my dad's first wife tragically died of cancer, leaving three children. So I had three half brothers. That in itself is enough of a trauma for anyone and anybody to ever have to deal with. The love of his life. I think, if I remember rightly, the youngest son was about 9 months old or something. The oldest one was 8 years. So there's a tragedy there just because my dad's first wife died. He remarried, second wife. I came along, and he eventually remarried a third time until he died actually about 2 months ago. So there's enough issue just in that alone of that tragic death that he had to face with three children. But then I came along. My dad and mum were only married for 4 years. And then he remarried again to his, as I say, his current wife until he passed away a few months ago. But it wasn't great. It was a very, fragmented, maybe starts to cover some of the issues. But in reality, it was a very, very broken family. We lived not far away from his parents. I used to walk there after school. So I had a grandma who was really sweet. But my granddad died when I was 7. Because I think in some ways, and this perhaps is the beginning of my understanding of all this, in some ways I think my dad's dad tried to fill a hole because my dad had left. And so he tried to fix a window pane when I broke it, or he'd help with a plug socket or whatever. And he would always be there to do these little jobs that, generally speaking, a dad probably would do. My dad in particular was particularly skilled. He was an electrical engineer, highly skilled. So anything in the house, from plumbing to boilers to electrics, he would fix. So there was a big void when you left. But I think my father's dad tried to fill some of that void, and I think it exhausted him perhaps. But I have great memories of him because I knew how to change a wheel on a car. I remember being less than 7, and I vividly remember being on the drive, fixing a wheel and replacing it, and putting a tyre on a wheel and putting the wheel back on the car. And I have a great memory of that. It's a really good bit of history of a man stepping in to do something which was really exciting. And that memory's never left. I mean, it's changing a wheel, which is pretty mundane, not quite so much today, I suppose, with modern tyres, but it was really exciting. The age of 5 and 6, having spanners in my hand and someone who trusted me to do stuff with a car. It was great. And I think that's the beginning, really, of some of my own passion for the importance of dads, and particularly men generally, on boys. We're really blessed, Joe and I. We've got 3 really godly boys, and I'm really glad they've got me around, but I'm really glad they've got a very female Joe to sort of offset against me. So they've got a very balanced parenting. And I didn't have that because my dad left when I was 4. So I was raised by my mum, and it wasn't a great childhood at all. And there's enough complication with my dad. My mum was adopted. So there's a whole host of emotional issues that come in through that as well. Mm. And you've got all this mishmash of stuff for a 4-year-old trying to think what is going on here. And divorce, we tried to work it out, Joe and I, how many generations are impacted by one single divorce. And it was quite staggering because you're into kind of great grandparents before no one knows anybody who might have been involved. So whilst I'm not going to go into whether divorce is good or bad, that's a whole other thing, but divorce is massively impactive. And as a child, I remember vividly thinking, obviously I'm the one that isn't loved. Obviously I'm the one at fault. And I've met so many people who've been through divorces who think exactly the same thing, and it's just not true. But as a small child, what else are you going to think? Well, it must be my fault. I must have upset someone somewhere. And it breeds a real sense of insecurity. It breeds fear. And it's just so destructive. So that was me at age 4 thinking, what am I supposed to do here? And then you've got the usual kind of story of my dad moving away, a new wife who had her own 2 daughters as well. And you've got this kind of blended family, for want of a better description. My dad, I would see every other weekend, and then it was every few weekends, and well, some weekends and maybe a holiday. And before long, I was barely seeing him, which I know is very normal for many people. But for a young lad with 3 half brothers, one of whom I never saw, one who stayed at home, one who stayed at home, thought I better go and live with my dad, and then decided he didn't, then came home and then was told, no, you can't come here anymore. And all this was under the age of 10 for me. And it created quite a tsunami or a cyclone, I suppose, of just this whirling confusion, fear, anxiety, anger, frustration. I mean, it's all very negative, and that's what I grew up through. And I know for many people, there's a lot of similarity there who've been through this, and they think, well, it must be my fault. And I can say, looking back at the age of 4, it's not my fault. I know that now. But at the age of 4, 5, 10, you don't have the wisdom or the maturity to be able to state that with any kind of conviction. So that was me growing up, and it was very broken, very fragmented. My oldest half brother disappeared. I didn't hear of him or see him from the age of, 13 till 2 months ago. So that's nearly 40 years, 30 years. The youngest half brother of those 3 from my dad's first marriage, told you this was complicated. He was really broken, clearly. He ended up going and living off in another continent around the world. The middle half brother of the 3 stayed at home. But over the years, I'm just going to cut to the end deliberately here, but over the years, it became a very fragmented family that became estranged. And 14 years ago, Joe and I made the decision we can't keep chasing after people who don't want to be with us, because any relationship, you can only go so far before there has to be some sort of reciprocal, mutual thing. Joe talks of radiators and drains. You can have people who are radiators and they warm you up, or you can have people who are like drains and they just suck the life out of you. And I wouldn't say that of my family, but I would say they definitely weren't radiators either, maybe somewhere in the middle. But what I found was we were the ones making the effort, and we would go and see them, and they just didn't want to see us. And jumping back a bit, my father, who died in November, just after we had COVID. We'll come back to November. That was a fun month. But finding out that he died was really rough. But he never forgave me for selling our house, because as a man, as a husband, as a father, you have a bricks and mortar investment, and you make sure you provide for your family in the future. And he was a Christian, as a godly guy. He really was. He was an amazing preacher. He worked with some great people here in the UK, started some amazing missions and works, and was part of that. And yet he didn't ever forgive me. I know he didn't, because he told me. He never forgave me for selling our house, because that was stupid and irresponsible. Because you're supposed to have bricks. And we were saying, look, this is a faith journey. We know God's going to catch us. And for 14 years, we've had many houses, many situations, and we've never had a house that we can easily afford. And God always steps in through the most left field ways of how money's provided. Either it's not required or money suddenly appears in the bank. A few moves ago, when this is really God's testimony of me as a husband saying to my own children, God's got this, because we were moving house, we were unemployed, we had no money, with no deposit, no first month's rent. One person said, I want to give you a little bit of money towards moving. And I'm thinking, can you add a few zeros on the end? And then he paid the money, and he paid for the deposit and the first month's rent and a bit more. Wow. And we were down to days before moving and needing to pay the estate agent. And we've seen that so many times, that as we stepped out in faith, our Father God gives us what we need. I was really sad to lose my dad, but flicking back a little bit, we were in a church that was really growing at the time as a real move of the Holy Spirit. There were lots of families and children, and it was really good. But God provided me with 3 father figures who got me through most of my teenage years, and they were men in the church. They were married, they had children, and they'd take me with them to their family. We'd have a bag of chips, fries, I guess, if you're American, but we'd go and buy a bag of chips, or one of them would show me how to do a wheel spin in a car. And there was one guy who was like a spiritual mentor. And these three guys, I'd lost my dad at the age of 4, really, but God provided me with 3 godly men who carried me through my teenage years. So I lost one dad and gained 3. And I found that in my life, that God provides what we need. And then as we got older, I didn't need them. They disappeared, moved away, and whatever. And it wasn't such a need. But God always gives us what we need.
Mm-hmm. I want to touch on that just because of what you said about your dad and, realizing that it was all on one side. You were trying to have a relationship with him. That I've discovered, or I believe I've discovered, that forgiveness really, for me, it required me recognizing that the person that I'm angry because I'm trying to get them to give me something that they're not capable of giving me, or they refuse to give me. And as long as I keep going to that person to give me something they're not going to give me, I'm going to keep getting mad at them. And then just recognizing they're not going to give me what I want. So I need to forgive them for that and trust God to provide it in some other arena, some other way. And it sounds like that's exactly what happened in your life with that God gave you, like you were saying, he gave you those 3 men to replace, to fill in the gap where your father was just not going to give you what you needed.
Yeah, I think he wanted to, in some ways. We miss him a lot, because although we were estranged from him for 14 years, we missed him at Christmas, because when he was in the room, he was amazing. He was a force of nature. He would come in with a big smile, and people would be happy. But I guess, I don't know, was it guilt? Was it inability? Was it a generational emotional struggle? But he wasn't in the room very much. And I think that was quite key. When he was there, it was great. When he wasn't, it was turmoil. The one, I suppose, is quite raw, but I think this is an important one to share. When I was 15, 16, I wrote him a letter saying, look, Dad, if you're going to be a father, you need to be my father. And if you're not, then please don't ever see me again. Because the emotional turmoil of the last 12 years at that point, it's too great. I need a man who's going to be my father and be in my life, or don't be in my life. Because this halfway house, I was emotionally ruined by it all. And he never replied to the letter. A couple of years later, I went to live in Manchester in the UK. I was doing some youth work with a thing called the PACE Project, which is now international. It's a great project. But I was living in a house and I bought a mobile phone. I was 18. I was very much in love with my now wife, who moved from Devon up to a place called Derbyshire, which was a bus ride away. That was key. 2.5 hours on a bus, but hey, it was a bus ride away. But I remember I said to my dad, I had this mobile phone. And again, this is 1994 to 1995. So mobile phones back then, really, really expensive to call. They're not like today. If you wanted to call a mobile phone from a landline house phone, you really needed to talk to that person, because you could just see the money just disappearing. My dad called me in Manchester on my mobile phone. We chatted for an hour and a half. I know it was a long time because the battery ran out. And it was a massive cradle for the recharge. And I had the cradle with the phone against my head to try and keep talking. And I think that was my dad's reply to that letter when I was 16.
And that was his cost or your cost?
His cost. I wouldn't say he was really into money. That wouldn't be true or fair. I think he was very much, we need to provide for the future, which is great. And having said that, I'm still surprised he made that phone call for that long, because back then, I can't comprehend the cost of that phone call. It would have been eye-wateringly expensive. But I believe, and I've always believed, that was his reply to my letter, because we were able to have a relationship once I'd left home. And I can't imagine the turmoil of how do you have a relationship with a child when they're living with a former partner. I don't know how that happens. I know it happens badly often. I don't think there's a right way of dealing with that. But I think once I'd actually left, then I began to have a relationship of some meaning. And it was all going well until we sold our house. And then he was really unimpressed.
So that maybe was some wounds in your dad's life that he hadn't quite...
Yeah, I think so.
dealt with.
Yeah, I think they had the idea that they wanted the four boys and the two girls to become this one family. I know a lovely couple who had that situation. Both, I think, lost their other halves respectively, and they found each other, got married, and they had, I don't know, 7, 8 kids from 2 marriages. And they said, look, we've got to find a way of these children living together. They didn't have a lot of money, so they couldn't have a big house. So we're going to be in a small space. What do we do? So they bought a caravan, really cheap little caravan, and they basically went for a week to a caravan. The caravan was written off by the end, but the children had kind of found this pecking order of how they could kind of live in an interwoven way. And they said it was a horrible week, but we found a way of the children finding a way of getting on with each other. And the caravan bore the brunt, and it was then burned. But they found a way of getting the children to get on with each other. And then they were great after that. And there's just this initial, I don't know, angst or aggression or hurt or whatever. And the caravan was their solution. So
when you say caravan, you mean it like what we would call a minivan, or like a traveling RV, a bus?
Something you tow behind your car.
Okay.
And not very big.
Right. So you basically, it was like a boiler. You put everybody in the same thing.
Yes.
And you have to figure it out.
That's exactly what they did and how they worded it, actually. And it worked. And they were great. We love them. But there are things that we can do, but are we willing to go through the messy bit to get to the good stuff? And again, we had so much messy stuff with my family. It just became untenable. I mean, part of the faith journey, I had a tiny, tiny business online selling eco-friendly stuff, making £100 a year, tiny amount. And we prayed for God to teach us faith. And we knew when we prayed that, it was very clear God wanted us to take this teeny tiny little business that wasn't really anything other than a hobby and turn it into a shop. So we sold our house, got all the money. We bought a caravan ourselves to live in for 6 months. In the end, trying to go around some of the country where we want this shop to be. We're not tied to any location. And we ended up in a place called Shropshire, which is a beautiful county in the UK. Lots of green, lots of independent shops in the city at the time. And we set up a shop there. And living in the caravan was fun. There were only 4 of us, although 2 were in cloth. 1 was in cloth nappies, so that was entertaining. But we had that for 6 months. We had a shop.
I need to translate. Cloth nappies would be like cloth diapers.
Yes, sorry, cloth diapers. I'm getting better at the English American.
Yeah, I just have to translate just for our people on this side of the pond.
Absolutely. So it was a challenge but fun. We found a shop. We settled down. We found a flat above a shop so we could live in one unit, which is great. And then we discovered that there were plans for a lap dancing club. Now, we had a shop front on a little side street, but our domestic access to the flat above went through a little tiny passageway, some teeny tiny little flat things, and opposite the exit onto the main road, opposite there was the entrance to the lap dancing club.
To a lap dancing club.
Yeah, it became very personal.
Yeah.
It wasn't open. There were plans to open it. Lots of churches in the area got together and prayed. And for it to open, it had to go through a planning committee with the council. Not quite sure what council translates to, but local officials, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And it got to this stage, and the churches were gathering together en masse, and they were praying. Got to the planning, and the planning people said, we don't want this club. We cannot stop it. There is no legal right for us to prevent it. Any of the boxes that need to be ticked, they've ticked. So it was going ahead, and that was that. A tiny number of us who were really passionate about the city centre kept praying. When I say tiny, there were 4 of us. And there were dozens of churches at one point. But we kept praying for God to find a route. Because I was an ex-lorry driving guy who sold diapers, I was really popular with local, quite a big paper. And I rang them up and said, look, it's me. Can I do an article for you? I want to do a full page on lap dancing clubs. And I only touched on the economic side. What happens to a community? What's the money going to be like? What's going to happen to the local businesses? He said, yeah, great, go for it, write it, we'll edit it and put in what we can. In the end, I have the entire front page of the business section, which was read by many people because it was actually very good. Um, and I looked at a few other areas in the UK that had gone big on, lap dancing clubs. It's business, it's great, it's commerce, it's money, it's all this. And then the ensuing nightmare of red light districts and policing involvement, no-go areas, multiple rapes were normal. And I wrote all this, really matter of fact. I was quoting other councils, and the lap dancing club was pulled. And this was the third attempt for a club to be built when they're sort of near or in this city. That it was closed. The four of us celebrated. People suddenly wanted to come and pray in celebration again. And we said, look, where were you? We kept praying, not being cruel here, but why did you give up? What's a planning application approval to God? I mean, come on. So in the end, we had a tiny shop. There was a big building. It was an old post office, I think, once upon a time. So it had massive rooms, a huge shop underneath. There was a furniture shop. And the landlord said, look, do you want to have this shop? It's actually this. It turns out it's the same landlord that had our shop and the shop we eventually went into, which was massive. And this whole complex was going to be lap dancing club, restaurant, and all this stuff. Upstairs was converted to flats instead. We had the downstairs shop. We had half of it in the end. And it was just an amazing miracle of God using our willingness to stand up. We got an awful lot of quite personal, horrible attacks from local people who wanted the club to happen. But it was cancelled. And when my wife, God bless her, she's great at this, she said to our landlord, why did you pull the plug on the club? He said, well, I read your article and I was shocked. I didn't know lap dancing clubs were so bad. And he was, to be fair to him, really passionate about local business. And he didn't know how bad and damaging it would be because nobody would come to that area. And that's what I focused my article on. So it was pulled. He gave us the shop instead. And there was a local church dancing group who came and danced in our shop when we opened. After we'd finished getting in there, it was painted and all that. And it was just this rejoicing of there's a Christian business exactly where this lap dancing club was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And we were never overtly Christian, but that was when I look at the faith journey from selling our house and all the many criticisms of how stupid, reckless, dangerous we were, irresponsible, how dare you do this, you're destroying your children's future. Do you know what? All of that's worth it because we stopped a lap dancing club. Not because we're amazing in any way, but I was just willing to stand and say, do you know what? This is not a good idea. And it was cancelled. And that was it. Sadly, the business closed not long after. We had a recession. Banks pulled our account, basically froze it, as it did to many small businesses, and basically said, we want your money. And lots of small businesses disappeared very, very rapidly. We got approval for a loan from a major bank, and even they were then turned down. They weren't allowed to lend money. So our business closed. We took out of that £60,000 of debt. So that's enough to buy a house in the UK. We went in with 40. We came out with £60,000 of debt, but God was really honouring that because we paid it off. We had so many businesses that we obviously had many suppliers, and they were just stunned that we weren't running away. And one of them, the biggest supplier we had, we owed him lots, and then some. And he wrote it all off. He said, "I don't want your money. I'll do the same terms with you next week. You can have the same credit terms. Nobody acts like you. Nobody acts with integrity and honesty. I don't understand it, but I really like it. So I'll do business with you next week. Forget the debt." And we had quite a few of those because we didn't run away. And I think all of that stuff that had gone on took our time a lot. I mean, we were in a shop 6 days a week. We had church on a Sunday. So Sunday afternoon was the only time we had to do anything. And that was the half day when we go and see my dad. And that's why I share all of that, because that's the only day we could have to go and see my half brother who was local, or my dad. They'd never come to see us. They just didn't want to, sadly. And so we go across to them, we drive out. And in the end, Joe and I said, we can't keep doing this. We're exhausted. We actually need to go and be with people that are going to help us, not drain us. And, it's a bit harsh to say, but it's true. And in the end, we stopped. And as soon as we stopped, the relationships just died off because it was all about what we would do. And I share all that about the club because that's God's goodness. But all of that is what our life was for a year and a half. And it was a lot of time. And we loved it, every second of it. I'd do it again if I could. It was brilliant. We had some great customers, and we were just a mainstream shop that didn't want to deal with the kind of the weird and wacky of being green. And there's a lot of that. But we challenged people in a good way. And it took a lot of our time. But that time we then have to spend more carefully. And I think that was the beginning of a separate journey of how are we going to invest the spare time we've got. There's work time and there's social time. And I don't want my social time to be stolen, because that's my time when I can invest in my children, in my home, in my family, in my walk with Jesus Christ, in kind of churches and stuff.
Yeah.
And that really challenged me. The lap dancing bit was amazing because that's God coming through. And that really taught us that, because all that step of faith and all the criticism I got, especially sadly from family members, it was worth it, because you know what, we stopped a lap dancing club and we were willing to put our neck on the line for that. It didn't cost us the business. That was a recession. That happens. But it was worth it, and we do it again. And that's God's testimony.
Yeah, there's a fight in you, and you know, I know, like, not everyone has that same fight about a lap dancing club being you know, opened across the street. I wish everyone did. You know,
Yes.
like, but you did have that fight. You also, what I hear in what you're just sharing is, like, you don't like people running away. If there's a fight, you're going to have it out. And I think it sounds like a lot of that is kind of a reaction to some stuff in your childhood of where maybe that didn't happen and it should have happened.
Yes.
And now you're saying, well, it's in my life, I'm going to fight. I'm not going to run away.
Yeah.
But I don't get any sense of bitterness. A lot of times, you know, when we see our parents do something we don't like, we say, I'm never going to be like them. And then we find out we're exactly like them. Or maybe
Yes.
someone else points it out and we get really mad because we don't want it to be true, but it's true. But it seems to me that you have succeeded in doing something that you saw some failures and you said, I don't want to do that. I want to do it differently. And you succeeded. If you think that's accurate, I mean, what do you think? I don't sense bitterness from you. Is that true? Do you think there is bitterness, or?
No, there isn't. There's sadness, but there's no bitterness. There was. I had to go through some pretty serious therapy in my mid-30s because of some traumas that were picked up upon by my doctor that even I didn't know I'd experienced. That helped a lot with childhood stuff. Not with my dad, but that dealt with a lot of the anger that I brought into my marriage and my relationship with Joe. She was feisty enough, strong enough to say that's not okay. What's the matter with you? And that started a real journey of healing. And yeah, I don't have bitterness for a few reasons. One, I think I understand why my dad struggled as he did and had a third marriage. I have no bitterness for what he did. I can't justify what he did. That's a different thing entirely. But I understood many, many years ago why he would struggle with that. His parents were really sweet and lovely, didn't know Jesus. And there's a big difference. My other grandparents, my granddad particularly, I mean, he fought in the war. He was, he killed people. That's the reality of what he did. He was in the Chindics, which was a special jungle unit for the British Army. And he speaks of what he went through, but he also knew Jesus. And despite having every right to hate the Japanese for what they did to him and all that kind of stuff, he didn't hold on to bitterness. So there's a good role model there. But he knew Jesus, so he was quite peaceful about it too. Sad, he lost, I think, 3 or 4 of his brothers to malaria, but he didn't hold bitterness. It was quite a shock when someone dies. And my granddad, he died quite a long time ago, but he had almost, oh, well, that's it, they're dead now. And I struggled with that initially, but then how many people has he seen died over the course of his fighting in the war? And, he didn't have bitterness, and that was a good example for me. But no, I don't have bitterness. We've never done my parents did this or didn't do that, so we'll go the opposite. That never ends well. Like you say, you just end up doing it anyway. We've always said, what does God say? If the boys have done something and we've had to get them to say sorry about something, we always say, but don't say sorry to us first. Get yourself right with God first before you deal with anybody, because he's the most important relationship you've got. Don't say apologies to me. Yes, you should later, but get yourself right with God first. And we've always had that mentality of get yourself right with God. What does Scripture say? What's God's best for us, which is our current motto for the year. What's God's best for us? So we don't just do good. We want God's best. I don't want God's good. I want God's best. And that's our sort of thinking at the moment in decision making that we make. But no, there's no bitterness. One, if I can't forgive, God won't forgive me. those are powerful words. They're not to be bandied around. I mean, we need to seriously think about people we won't forgive, because if we won't forgive them, Scripture tells me that God won't forgive me. So I want forgiveness, so I have to be forgiving. And a lot of the Christian faith is about consequences. You know, we go to hell unless there's a consequence of Jesus dying, which means we can go to heaven. You know, there's a consequence. And so there's no bitterness. And there hasn't been. You know, I said goodbye to my dad 14 years ago, not face to face, but I'd said my goodbyes. So when he sadly passed away, and my estranged brothers, two of them suddenly got hold of me through our website saying he's died. Don't know if you're interested, but, you know, just think you should know. There's no bitterness because I'd already dealt with that a long time ago. You know, he didn't tell me my nan had died. And my nan, his mum, I spent a lot of time with her. Most days after school, I'd go to her house until dinner time. Sunday nights, I'd go there and play Scrabble with her. She kicked my butt a lot, and I learnt bigger words, and I started to play better. There's a good story in that one, I suppose, for another time. But, you know, we learn from people who are better from us, don't we? We learn from our mistakes. But I was, you know, quite sad when I didn't know she died for a year. But there's no bitterness there either, because I don't think he had the capacity, clearly, to have that kind of an emotional connection or relationship. I think he wanted to. I think he desired to. I don't think he had necessarily the knowledge of how to. Mm-hmm. Certainly that's the evidence that I would say from my life. I'm not going to say what I think, but what I know is he struggled with that. Mm-hmm. So when we had our children, we lost what would have been our third child, our daughter. He turned up with his third wife, who was really lovely, came with some flowers, and he just didn't know how to communicate in that time. And although we were grieving the loss of our daughter, I was kind of sad for him that he didn't quite know how to engage with us at an emotional level. Most people that came just came and cried, and that was all we needed. That was the best communication, but I don't know that he knew how to do that. And I don't know if there's a childhood or the grief of his wife or whatever had gone on, but, you know, I cry a lot. I cry when I pray. My kids see me crying a lot. And, you know, I think it's one of the most manly things to do is to be willing to shed a tear. If Jesus cried, then I should. Mm-hmm. I've got no right to say I'm going to be a man and not cry. Well, Jesus wept, so I need to cry and show emotion. Jesus got very emotional, so I should get emotional too. Not let your emotions run away, different issue. But I should be willing to face the emotions I have. Yeah. And we've always been with that way with our kids. So bitterness, we haven't got place for bitterness. Mm. Sure, it's there. I'm not perfect. You have to work through this stuff, and I'm sure I'll have memories that come back. I'll have to deal with it once more. But no, sadness, but not bitterness.
Yeah, I think that is a key to being able to forgive people too, is to understand them, like to understand your parents' story, and to know, like, you begin to see where they hurt as opposed to see where they are doing the hurting. I mean, you still feel the hurt, but you more understand this comes from a lack, something that they need. They need some healing. So there's compassion enters in, and so that's really cool. So you're a stay-at-home dad. Your kids are getting older. You guys do a YouTube channel. I don't know how much the kids are still involved in that.
Lots.
What's that?
Lots and lots.
Lots and lots. Okay.
It's a family affair, definitely.
And they enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, different elements, but we were in ministry for a while, full-time ministry with children. That's our heart and passion. That ended last year, and we wanted to do something that continued our ministry, even though we weren't working in churches anymore. So that's when we began the Berry Bunch. So the boys have their own thing they do called Endurance, which is basically topical issues, and they then talk about it. And how do we endure in our faith? That's always the hook for that one. Joe and I do most of the stuff. I do a lot of my own things. But yeah, everyone's involved. I mean, our little one, Peter, he's there with the clapper so we can time the audio and video. And every one of us gets involved in some way. Dave the dog we do, which is a little puppet, which is great fun. But that's definitely 5 of us because there's an awful lot of stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of fun. I mean, they hopefully look fun on camera when they're being watched. We have a huge riot at home of laughter when we're making it because it goes wrong.
Right.
Lots.
Yeah.
But that's fun. That's okay.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with mistakes.
That's great. Well, we'll put a link to your channel below today's show.
Thank you.
And just as we close, like, what is your son is 18.
18 tomorrow.
18 tomorrow. That's a big
Yeah.
milestone right there.
It's a big one.
Do you look forward to being a grandfather? I don't know how soon you
definitely.
expect that, but
I was married at 19 to Joe. I'm not sure when the boys are going to get married. I prayed. This is the only prayer I've been the most consistent on since prior to Stephen's birth. I pray every single night for my boys, for their future wives, because we've raised them to be godly men. When I got married to Joe, I couldn't clean the house. We had a cloth to clean the toilet, and we had a cloth to clean the sink, the basin. And I used the same cloth. And Joe was mortified. I only did it once wrong, but I had no clue. I'd never been doing that stuff. I couldn't cook. I couldn't clean. Every one of our boys can scratch cook a meal. I mean, literally taking whatever we've got and making a full balanced meal. Everyone, including Peter, who's 11. We do baking. We do cooking. They can clean the house. They do. They take a full share in everything that we do. And our goal, our passion, our mission in life is to raise 3 godly guys the best we can from what we understand God teaches us to do in a loving home with consequences and with an excitement. And ever since Stephen was a few months old, we've had comments in restaurants and shops. How are your children so, at the one time they're really quiet and unassuming, but they're also outgoing and clearly very happy to speak their own mind, but there's a respect there. And gosh, this is amazing. And we knew this was possible. We've been having that since Stephen was 6 months old. Mm-hmm. And we've had it regularly because we've tried to raise our boys in a godly way. They all came to faith at 4. Peter was 3. They all made very deliberate decisions to follow Jesus Christ. And we've seen the result of that, the fruit and the evidence of that decision to follow Jesus. And we're really blessed. We know that when we have a prayer time as a family, there's 5 Christians beseeching God for whatever it is. And we know we're hugely blessed to have that. It's a huge privilege.
That is awesome.
But we just want to raise our boys in a godly way. And, parenting is hard. Life is difficult. Being a father is really tough, and there's a lot of costs. But you know what? I wouldn't go back on any of the costs we've made. Everyone's been worthwhile. I look at my boys. I look at Stephen turning 18 tomorrow. There's a man of God. He's a man of God's heart. That'll do for me.
Yeah,
we've done something right.
That's awesome. Yeah, you came from a brokenness. You've experienced abuse. You've had your trials, but where you stand now, you have a whole marriage. You've got 3 sons that love the Lord, and you're together. You like each other. You're
absolutely
headed in the right direction. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Carl. Very much so. It's great.
Well, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please take a minute to rate and review it in whatever podcast app you use, or subscribe, like, comment. However, just let us know you're out there listening. We love to hear from you. We're going to have some more great guests on this podcast. We're currently traveling across the country, capturing testimony, creating new testimony by walking in faith ourselves, praying over people. We are excited about what God's doing in our day. He is reigniting the calling of men and women in the world. And so we encourage you to stick with us, subscribe if you haven't already, join our Telegram channel, check out our website. All the links are below the show as always. And we will see you guys again next time here on the Faith of the Fathers. God bless you.